Hey folks, Roger here. So several people have asked me recently why I'm not an atheist. Some of these people are online, some of these people are people I know in real life. And I think it's interesting so many people have asked recently. I think a lot of people maybe are rethinking the atheism that really took hold 10, 15 years ago, which is a good thing. So if you know me in real life, you know I've struggled with this quite a bit back in the day. And so I want to try to be concise and just share a few categories of reasons as to why I think atheism is not true and why I became very convinced of theism. And if you can tell, I'm out here on a lake about to wait for some fish to bite, but I had a few minutes, so I thought I'd just share those with you. So right at the front, I won't be able to answer every single question that you have, every single thing that your mind can run to. I can't answer that in a quick video. But what I want to do is share some categories of reasons for you to go and investigate further if you're interested. If you ask complicated questions, sometimes you get complicated discussion in return. At the end of the day, though, the answer is pretty simple. I'm not an atheist because I don't think atheism is true. I think that theism is true. And if you know me, you know that I'm a Christian, and you know that I am pretty confident. I'm an adult convert to the Catholic Church, which is interesting because the more I partake in sacraments, the more I think I know Christ, and the more I know myself. And it's an interesting thing. So why I doubted that there might be a God. I've talked about this in other videos. You might want to watch those. Excuse the plane, please. I went into more detail in some of those other videos, but I want to ask you this. If you think there might not be a God, I want you to ask yourself, be honest with yourself and ask yourself, are there any reasons besides intellectual reasons that might keep you from thinking God is real? We're not Vulcans. We're not creatures based purely on logic. We're not creatures who make every life decision based purely on evidence. We might want to be that way, but that's not what we really are. So, some things that might affect someone believing God exists or not. Someone might think, someone might have emotional struggles. Maybe your life hasn't turned out the way that you've wanted it. Maybe you've seen horrible things happen to people that you love or care about. Maybe you've seen suffering in the world. Maybe you have lust and you want to do things that you don't think God would approve of. I'm not saying that's you. I just want you to be honest with yourself. Is this simply a logical thing that's keeping you from belief in God, or is this something that in your heart, mind, soul, way of life might also be adding to that? I just want you to examine that. I know in my own life, seeing things that I just struggled with happen to people that should not have happened to them did add weight to the atheist argument from evil. Why do good people suffer? In other words, if God can do anything, and he's all knowing and he's all loving and he's all powerful, why do children get abused? Why do people get diseases? Why do tsunamis wipe out massive amounts of people? I've struggled with those things. Not all of those are purely intellectual, though. There's some emotional weight there. For understandable reasons, I just want you to examine yourself on that, okay? Lots of things I could say there, but another reason that I, for a while, questioned whether or not there was a God. I was never fully convinced of atheism, but I asked myself that question, right? Because I had seen some really unreasonable Christians, people who were Christian leaders, who would argue for things, even things that I might think are true, but they do it so poorly. I'm talking about just illogical, no evidence, silly, they'd say silly things. And sometimes they weren't good people. And then I'd see atheists, on the other hand, in 2010, like Chris Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Lawrence Krauss, scientists, intellectuals saying, hey, follow the evidence where it leads, study, and then preachers saying outlandish things and sort of insulting you if you ask a question. So it just made me, it made me ask some questions, right? That being said, I did take a lot of time to look into this. I had a friend named Nick who encouraged me to read more philosophy and history, which I'd already read some. And it turns out that there are better reasons, I think, for believing in God than there are reasons to be an atheist. I just want to share a few categories of those things with you. And then, if you're interested, I can't answer every objection or question, but go look up these things on your own, okay? So one is, this isn't what clinched it for me, but this is just, I think, a good argument for the beginnings of the universe. So some Christians think that the universe is 6,000 years old because they count the genealogies up in the Bible, and they think that the creation account in Genesis 1, for example, is literally 7 days. I'm going to ask you, and so much of the debate between atheists and Christians in the 90s was on that point. I'm going to ask you to set that aside and say, those are important issues worth looking at. What genre of literature is Genesis? All this. But that's not really the main point of argument whether God exists or not. If the earth is 6,000 years old, or eternal, or 1,000,000 years old, or 13 billion years old, God exists independent of that factor. It doesn't follow logically that if the earth is millions of years old or billions of years old, that there is no God. There is an argument. I'm not alone out here, so if you can't hear it, there's a frog over there. So there's an argument called the Kalam cosmological argument. So back in the day, intellectuals thought that perhaps the universe was eternal, that it had no hard beginning. That did change in the standard cosmological model, whether you accept it or not. That did change with Einstein's relativity and everything, to the point where scientists now believe that all space and time, matter and probably energy, came to existence at some finite point in the past. And there's a story behind that. Intellectuals really started scratching their heads. There were philosophers who would debate this, and once they figured that out, it is evidence, I think, leaning towards theism. Here's why. So the argument goes, everything that begins to exist has a cause that brought it into existence. So I'm not past eternal, I don't exist eternally in the past. I came into existence at a certain finite point in the past. And that existence, that beginning, has an explanation. It has a cause that caused me to come into existence. You can do that really with everything in the universe, as far as we can tell. The trees around me, the water around me, water formed at some point in the past. The planet we're on, we share, this fragile little planet, came into existence at some finite point in the past. Whatever view you take, it's not past eternal. If you take the standard cosmological model of the universe, then the stars formed and the elements were formed, and gravity pulled these things together, and then over time, either way, the stars themselves, the galaxies, formed. They began to exist, and so did the universe itself. So what brought it into existence? So logically speaking, if all space, time, and matter came into existence at a finite point in the past, I think it's worth asking what pre-exists that is not made of matter, that is not in time, that is not etc. That is not spatial, that is beyond spatial boundaries. I think that very quickly could look like a picture of God, what we call God. Now that's not knockdown, drag out argument for me, but it is something worth considering if you're an honest person. What I think is that fits with a theistic picture of the universe more than it fits with an atheist picture of the universe. But for me, that wasn't really quite enough, though it was a good one. What wound up happening for me, since people have asked me why I'm not an atheist, it's more like if I consider the universe from multiple layers, each one of those layers, after some point in time, began to seem like, taken together, they would lead my mind towards God as opposed to no God. That's one. As you probably are aware, if you're an atheist, a studied atheist person, a gentleman named Leibniz, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, co-inventor of calculus, super smart guy, was a believer in God. He asked the question of why is there something rather than nothing? In other words, it's not just how do we come into existence, it's why does anything exist at all? Because it doesn't seem to be the case that anything, the trees around me, the water I'm floating on, me, the world in which we live, the solar system, etc., exists by necessity. These things are contingent. They depend upon something else for their existence. So not only are they cause, but they're dependent, we're dependent realities. So why does any of it exist? At some point, you're going to come to the buck would stop, and you're going to say, well, it would seem to me that if everything is contingent upon something else for existence, then what are the first contingent things? It's logical to think that that their existence depends upon something that's not contingent, something that's self-existent, something that's necessary. That fits so much with what classical Christians, historical Christian philosophers like Thomas Aquinas mean by the word God. I want to clarify this. What we don't mean by God is a little angry man with a beard living on a planet somewhere. We don't mean Zeus. We don't mean Odin or Wotan. We mean this being that is beyond space and time, that's really beyond our minds. This would be an infinite mind, an infinite reality that's beyond space and time, who has unfathomable power and intelligence, who can work in not only my decisions, but every possible decision I would make. He would know every possible decision that every human mind can make, which decision they will make, and without forcing them, he can work within that. That's the kind of mind that we'd be talking about here. We're talking about a mind that's not bound by space and time. But everything in this universe is contingent, it seems, and came into existence at a finite point in the past. Which leads me to think there's something before the universe that fits with what Christians mean by God, and that this being is a necessary self-existence being. So those are a couple arguments. I'd like you to look into that a little further. There's a little gentleman named William Lane Craig, and he has videos that just kind of concisely summarize those in like 5-10 minutes in like an animated form. It's good for teenagers. But also look into a gentleman named Thomas Aquinas. He's a 13th century Italian Catholic philosopher. His arguments are a little bit more complicated, but they really helped me. So Thomas Aquinas pulled from Aristotle's metaphysics. I don't think Aristotle's metaphysics are totally arbitrary, but he took a system of thinking about reality, and he used words to describe that reality as far as different types of causes, formal cause, things like this, material cause. Thomas Aquinas took that, and I think Aristotle and Plato were at least somewhat aware that there must be some reality beyond all of this, right? Aquinas took that and put it into formal arguments called the 5 ways. They're what's called the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas. Just take some time and look those up. I looked those up in college. I read them, thought the man was a moron. And my friend Nick said, Roger, you didn't understand them, read them again. And I actually needed a philosopher to kind of translate this to me. So there's a gentleman named Ed Feser. He's a Catholic philosopher. And he's really good at breaking those down into modern parlance, into modern speech, and explaining why these actually are very logically coherent. So those are a couple of categories of reasons, but I think there's more than that. So those are the beginning of the universe seemed to me to match with theism. The fact that anything exists at all when they didn't have to be matches more with theism to me. But another layer of reality. So human beings are moral creatures. In other words, we have this element of our being, our psyche, that is sort of like a moral intuition, a moral sense. Now we can silence that. There's something definitely wrong with human nature. There's a lot of injustice and evil in the world. But yet, the point here would not be that all religious people are automatically more moral than non-religious people in their day-to-day lives. I don't believe that. I've seen some atheists who are more concerned with being kind to their neighbors, unfortunately, than some Christians I've known. And I need to do better at that myself. But we have this moral layer, and I think here's what captured my mind on this. Something deep down inside of us knows when we see something that is just unjust. And if we know it's unjust, something inside of us, whether we believe in God or not, cries out for justice. We want there to be a moral good. And I think that alone speaks to the fact that there's more to the world than matter. So you are more than the chemicals of which you're made. You're more than atoms and protons and neutrons. There's a transcendent layer to you. The trees behind me, for example, there's some immaterial aspect to them. To humans, I think, particularly, because something deep inside of us would scream out if I see a child abused, or if I see rape, or if I see real oppression in the world. Something inside of me says, and you too, says that's not the way it's supposed to be. Because something inside of us knows there is a way things are supposed to be. I heard a fish jump. I might have to go soon. I'm trying to catch some largemouth bass. But why? Because if God does not exist, God philosophically in history is seen as the grounding of morality. He is goodness. It's not that God dictates what is good, it's that God's nature itself is goodness. He's perfectly good. He's the ground of being. It's almost like he's the. You ever seen a map of space in which there's gravitational fields and you see a planet and you see all the fields kind of warping around that giant center of a sun or a planet? I think that's God. God is the gravitational center of being, of reality, of goodness and morality. Now, were I an atheist, I would have to say, I can think of no other way that would seem valid to me than to say that our moral compass is nothing more than something that we were evolved for some type of survival mechanism. So perhaps I think they asked Richard Dawkins, a famous evolutionary biologist, this, and he said that someone said, if you think that the universe is nothing but at rock bottom, there's no goodness, there's no evil, it's nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. There is no good, there is no bad, there's no evil. Yet the man still cries out at what he sees as injustice or oppression of humans for some reason, betraying the fact that somewhere inside of him, he knows there's more than blind, pitiless indifference. There's some kind of moral related humanity. But they asked him, what about charity? What about altruism? And he had to say, well, that must be some kind of a misfiring neuron. Charity is a misfiring neuron. I think that's a really poor explanation for Mother Teresa, or the love of a mother for her child, sacrificial love of a mother for her child. And there's a reason we resonate with that stuff in stories or in things like this. It's because we know those things are valuable. Because there's a moral layer to us that can't be explained by atheism. So another reason, and this one is sort of unquantifiable. This is something I look back on. Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous atheist philosopher, blamed so much of the Western world's problems on Christianity. He thought that Christianity had made men weak, had made society sick, and that it was Christianity valuing the weak, the lower elements of the human species, that allowed them to turn back and enslave their masters, when really the master should rule, the strong should rule the weak. But what I see in history is a lot of corrupt religious people, yes. Perhaps you're disappointed in fundamentalists you've seen, or the religious people you've seen, or some priests, or you're disappointed in the moral majority, something like this. That has all happened. And yet what I also see, if I look back at history, is the fact that Christianity really did change the world. Whether it's the valuation of women and children, whether it's the development of the belief in human rights with natural law theory that has affected the documents of Western civil society. Western society now assumes that human beings have value and rights, but in the past, that has a philosophical and frankly religious underpinning. Just read the Declaration of Independence. I see Christianity changing the world in these ways that have affected English common law and things like this. And Nietzsche was just wrong. All right, so the fists are really starting to bite, so I'm gonna have to go soon. But one more reason is there's something in physics called fine-tuning. This is not a religious, this is not a trick. This is not religious talk. This is physics talk. So people at the National Institute of Science and Technology have discovered that, or they try to measure out as accurately as they can, what's called cosmological constant. There are fundamental constants and quantities in the universe that don't seem to be necessarily that way. We don't know why these numbers are the way they are, but what we do know is that they're very, 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 very precise. Multiple of these quantities. And if any one of these numbers were off by very much at all, like splitting gnats hairs, there would be no life on this planet. In fact, there probably would be no planets. Planets would not have formed, elements wouldn't have cooked, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. That's called fine-tuning. That's not speculative, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology still has a list, as I recall, that you can get on those. Man, those fish are jumping. And just a couple of those things, you can look them up. But the gravitational constant is one of them. If the gravitational constant were off by, I think, 1 in 10 to the 60th, we wouldn't be here. There's strong and weak nuclear forces. There's the cosmological constant. There's a bunch of these. And it's not, I mean, if one of those things were off by a little bit, we wouldn't be here. That alone is just astronomically unfathomable. Do me a favor, get a piece of paper and write out 10 to the 60th. 1 in 10 to the 60th. Now, don't write it out in scientific notation, write out the zeros. And if that last significant digit, if that last digit were off by anything, we wouldn't be here. But it's more than that. It's not just that gravitational constant. It's any one of the number of these. So it does appear that the universe was fine-tuned, which is a word that physicists use, for life to be able to exist. It doesn't mean the universe was created for us. It just means that that does fit. The question would be why. That really does fit. That's what you would expect. That's exactly what you would expect if an infinite mind with unfathomable power created all this contingent reality that didn't have to exist. But when he created it, when this mind created it, he created it in such a way that we could sit here and have this conversation. That's exactly what you would expect if there's an order and rationality behind the universe. Now, the New Testament says, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was the Logos, which is a word that Plato used, but it's rationality. It's almost like word or mind or communication. Before all of this was the Logos. And I think that fits exactly with what we see from the science. Just one more reason. And I think atheism can try to account for that, but it can't account for it very well. Because at some point it just becomes it becomes less and less plausible that all of this is simply chance. Hey, Future Roger jumping in here for a quick point. What really got me on this was not just each individual argument for God's existence. meaning the fine-tuning, the argument from fine-tuning. The universe appears to be fine-tuned to an astonishing level that allows for human life to exist, for planets to form, and for us to have this conversation. That alone is difficult to make sense of under atheism. However, there can be explanations that atheists would try to offer. Maybe multiple universe theory, and we just happen to live in the one in which that has these certain mathematically tuned constants and quantities for us to exist. That I think is already a little sketchy, but that's an explanation. However, when I take all of these different arguments and points that I can examine the universe together and consider them as a whole, atheism utterly fails. So for example, that does not, if an atheist posits M theory, multiple universe theory, to explain fine-tuning, it doesn't explain the moral level of the universe. It doesn't explain the fact that those people who care about you and love you are more than just Darwinian tooth and claw. It doesn't explain why the universe exists at all. Because even if you posit M theory, you're still left with why is there something, M theory, or multiple universes, rather than nothing. And so I think when we take all these points together, why there is anything at all, the fact that everything in this universe is contingent and must depend at rock bottom on something that is not contingent, something that's necessary, the fact that the universe began to exist, and whatever exists before matter and space and time must be immaterial and timeless and exist before space and essentially infinite. The fact that the universe is fine-tuned for life to exist, all these things taken together with many more things, these are just a few. The only explanation that I can think of that makes any sense at all is the fact that God, who is very big, very large, very powerful, hyper intelligent, would create this place in such a way that these things occur. I can think of no other explanation that makes sense of all these things taken together. So, the atheist view, if taken to its conclusion, is that the universe is very cold and hard and lifeless, and that we just are these little tiny infinitesimal beings in this giant, vacuous, abysmal place until our existence is snuffed out. Now we can try to live bravely in accordance with that knowledge, knowing that nothing really matters, but we just soldier on anyway. But I think deep down we already know that our lives do matter in some way. By the way, your life matters to someone. And if God is real, your life objectively matters. It does, by the way. But the more we learn about science, and I think looking at science from a philosophical point of view, the more that atheist view of the universe just is not tenable. I'm telling you, James Webb Space Telescope, look at those pictures. The universe is unfathomably beautiful and large. It only seems vacuous and cold and dark to us when we look outside the window of our planet, because we exist on such a small scale relative to the universe. But the more we learn about the universe, the more unfathomably, profoundly beautiful it is. And I think that's what we should expect. The universe, the cosmos, is a world gone wrong, as the Christian picture presents. It's a cathedral that a bomb went off in. But it's a cathedral nonetheless. It's a beautiful place. And I think theism makes so much more sense of that than this materialistic, cold atheism. The more that we learn about the universe, the more atheism has to retreat not into knowledge, but into skepticism. Our inability to know, even though increasingly the universe seems structured and ordered, and there's these layers to the universe, transcendent layers, meaning, morality, beauty, etc. The universe was created from nothing, it seems to be the case. All these things, atheism then has to retreat further, not into knowledge and science, but into skepticism and even despair. And that is not necessary. So atheism often guises itself as intellectual humility. But I think oftentimes it's arrogance and a refusal to be willing to know oftentimes. But it's usually not humble towards the universe or towards people who believe in something greater. Really, atheism is a giving in to despair, and I'm not going to do that. Atheism is a throwing in the towel. I'm not going to do that. Plus, I think if we look at the universe at a large level and a local level, the universe that we observe fits better with theism rather than atheism, which really doesn't have any answers. None of this had to exist, and yet it does. We are moral creatures, and that doesn't seem to be something we're just evolved to do. It seems to be some real layer of what we are. Also, it seems to be that some things really are evil. Murder, violent evil, real oppression, those things are actually evil. That's an immaterial thing that's attached to a physical thing. The universe came into existence at a finite time in the past, which is what you would expect if something before the universe created this place. And it seems to be a fine-tune for us to exist. Things like this. Now, there are a lot more reasons, and I will say that whoever you are, you can always have questions about this. You can always say, but what about, what if? Whatever you choose to believe, if you decide to be an atheist, you think it through and you say, I'm done, I'm an atheist. That position, that view, isn't neutral, regardless of what the atheists say. I think we've seen that it's aggressively not neutral, as we've seen in the last few years. But also, you're still going to have questions. There's still going to be things you can't explain. There are weak spots, very weak spots. There are more weak spots in atheism, by far, than there are in theism. I'm just telling you like it is. So, had I chosen to become an atheist, it's not as though I would have had all the answers. Because I think the tendency is, I don't have all the answers for the God question. What about, what if? But we do have all these reasons to think that God exists, and many more. But there'll always be gray areas of where I just don't understand or don't know. And then we feel pressure to be like, I don't know about that, I don't know. And then we fall back into some kind of secular atheism as though it's the default position. But it's emphatically not the default position. And you can poke holes all in that. If I'm asked to explain why evil is in the world to an atheist, I'm going to push back and say, we can talk about that. It's an honest question. I've struggled with it, but also, atheism really can't account for beauty in the world. Because as we talked about in other videos, atheism, materialistic atheism, has to reduce beauty and charity and love, the love of a mother for her child, to chemicals, to neurons firing in the brain, to instincts. But love is obviously more than that, and I think we know that. I love my wife, right? That's not just, there are chemicals, there are neurons, but that's not all the love for my wife is. If you have someone in your life that's cared for you and loved you and wanted the best for you, that's not just Darwinianism. Dostoevsky said in The Brothers K, he said, he had a character point out that there is no law of nature that dictates a man should be charitable to another man. If human beings should be charitable to each other, we derive that from someplace else. And atheism fails in that. So I don't want you to feel like you need to be peer pressured into saying, I don't have all the answers, I've seen some crazy religious people, therefore I'm going to default to this peer pressure of secularism and just being a consumer and living your life, buying and consuming. Break free of all that. Break free of it. Live your life, get outside, move, read old books, and that'll help you. Wish you guys could have seen it. I did catch a couple fish, by the way, this little largemouth. And behind me, a mama deer and a baby deer just ran, and it was really beautiful. I wish I'd have been recording. Sorry. So one more thing I'd like for you to consider. This is something that I think is a real factor in why so many people don't believe, and one reason why you should reconsider. So nowadays we have a very consumerist, secularized culture, and I do think that people are not becoming atheists because they're studying philosophy and history and science and determining, man, all the philosophical arguments are in favor of atheism. Don't think that's the case at all. I think we do struggle with evil in the world and suffering, and I think that's the biggest arrow in atheism's quiver. But even that has logical explanations. And more than that, I'm just telling you what, guys, as I've discussed elsewhere, theism, particularly Christianity, makes more sense of why the person who's experiences evil actually their life is actually valuable. So if a little girl is harmed by an adult and it's unjust and it's evil, atheism, if true, if a correct view of the world, has zero reason to think that that little girl's life is valuable, or zero reason to think that that's not the way things should be. But theism would say that that little has. Now, most atheists think that that little girl's life is valuable, but there's no reason in atheism to think that's the case. Theism, we know exactly why that little girl's life is valuable. And her life has meaning even if her suffering did not. Even if there's senseless things that happen to people, deaths. If theism is true, if Christianity particularly is true, those lives have value. So I think that atheists, depending upon that view of evil and suffering as the one arrow in the quiver, fails. I think at the end of the day, Christianity makes more sense of that. But I think really what people are doing is they're just defaulting. They operate in the culture in which they live. And our culture increasingly has been stuffed full, saturated with secular, consumerist ideals that have left us bankrupt and empty. Consumerism, workaholicism, angry political ideologies. And I think we've had this, we have a liturgy of secularism, of watching SNL and Conan O'Brien and TikTok and all these things. And we almost feel like secularism is the default because of the culture in which you operate. Do yourself a favor, read Dostoevsky and the New Testament, and read Milton, and read Shakespeare, and read the great thinkers of the past, read poets, read John Donne. You're going to discover that Western civilization, until very recently, was thoroughly Christian. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't mistakes and oppressors and evil people, because there are. Power corrupts. But you're going to discover that even Charles Dickens has Christian values left over, right? If you read those things, you're going to see more non-quantifiable value to Christianity. Do yourself a favor and take the time to read some of those things. That's going to help you counter some of the craziness in the secular consumer world. I'm not even against buying things and eating fast food. I clearly like fast food, but I hope you see what I'm saying, right? One more thing. So, in the same way that I can't quantify my wife's love for me, or the love I have for my daughter, you can tell me about chemical processes and neurons firing, but I know it's more than that. And you know the people who've loved you and cared for you, their love for you is more than that. That's a kind of knowledge that isn't illogical, but it sort of transcends mathematics or chemistry. And I think that's the kind of knowledge you can have about religious things as well. The more I participate in the sacraments and give my heart and life to Christ, the more I submit my will to Him, the more I know. I've known for a long time, but I'm even growing in that knowledge by the grace of God. Because there is a knowledge that's not purely logical, because we're not Vulcans. We're human beings. Hey, I want the best for you guys. I really do. Even if I don't know you personally, I genuinely hope you're doing well. But I want to tell you, we want better in this world. We want better for ourselves. We want things to be better. Atheism ain't it. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do better. Atheism is not it. And for my part, historic Christianity is the direction I've chosen because I think it's true. Simple answer, I think I'm not an atheist because atheism isn't true. I'm a theist because I have plenty of good reason to believe in God. And I'm a Christian because I think that Christianity is true. So I don't like self-promotion at all. I'm not making these videos to promote myself. I would be doing videos differently. But I do know these videos tend to get pushed back. I get pushback. So if you would do me a favor, if you think this is helpful or interesting, or if you agree or not, would you consider giving it a like? And that just kind of helps YouTube know that this isn't totally worthless. Now, if you need books to read, I like to recommend books. Check out William Lane Craig's YouTube videos about the Kalam cosmological argument. He's a Protestant man, but on that argument, he's good. Check out Ed Feser, Peter Kraft. These are Catholic philosophers who make arguments for the existence of God. There's another fish. Read The 5 Ways of Thomas Aquinas. Those things will help you. And man, read Dostoevsky. Read C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Those things will help you. Just get you start. And you can, if you want to do more research from there, go right ahead. Hey, I'm going to get back to fishing. God bless you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch these videos. I hope you have a wonderful night. God bless. Take care.